All right, and welcome to the PIQ Workshop. So we will go ahead and begin. So first, I do want to take a moment to recognize that Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyu Ohlone, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. So, consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold UC Berkeley more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. So moving on to the comprehensive review factors. So these are the comprehensive review factors that are used by all 9 UC campuses during our application review. So you can see some of the things we will consider in our review would be the grade point average, your official UC GPA that we will calculate for you, your courses completed so far in high school and the ones that you have planned for your senior year, your AP, IB, UC honors, transferable college courses that you may have taken throughout high school, eligibility in the local context. So if you've been designated as the top 9% of your high school, that will appear on your application as well. We'll look at the quality of your senior year courses to see if you've continued your academic rigor and are challenging yourself during your last year of high school. The opportunities available to you at your specific California high school, achievements in special projects, geographic location, special talents achievements awards, as well as participation in educational prep programs, which could include Puente, and it could also include PoderOso. So a lot of things to consider. Some things that you don't see on here are sexual identity, gender identity, family income, ethnicity. All of those things aren't religious affiliation. None of those things are included in our review, so they will have no impact on your chances of admission. We won't see that information when we are reviewing your application. So first, I'll talk about the extracurricular section. So this is where we're hoping to find out how you spend your time outside of the classroom. So what are we looking for in this section? You'll have the opportunity to tell us about any activities, awards you received, volunteer experiences you've had, employment opportunities you've had, special programs you've participated in, and then any non-A through G coursework that you've taken during high school. So there's 20 spaces available. There's no preference on how you fill out these spaces. You could do 15 activities and 5 awards, or 5 activities, 5 awards, 5 volunteer experiences, and 5 employment opportunities, just to name a few. So it's really up to you how you fill it out. It doesn't matter which order either, as long as it's on the application. That's what we care about, because it will be taken into consideration. And then you'll report your activities or employment opportunities with average hours per week and weeks per year. So estimate your time as best as possible. And it is pretty short. So you only have 350 characters to describe each extracurricular activity. So you want to be very concise, to the point, and make sure you're getting your point across clearly. So some things to consider when you are filling out this part of the application would be to identify your role specifically in whatever you are talking about, whether it's your involvement in a specific club on campus, maybe if you're in Puente, if you are a shift manager at your local Starbucks, all those kinds of things. We want to know what you are doing specifically in there. So you want to demonstrate consistency. So prioritize things on the application that you've been doing for the last few years or so, like definitely in high school. And when I say demonstrate consistency, it can be in terms of like you've been doing it since 10th grade. So 10th, 11th, 12th grade in this one particular activity or employment or what extracurricular activity overall. Or it could be something that maybe you just started this year, but you've been doing it every single week. And it's become something very important to you. So we're looking for the quality over the quantity in terms of like one-off activities. Prioritize things that you've been really passionate about, because that really shows who you are and what you are passionate about and what you've dedicated your time to. You want to make sure you know any traditional or non-traditional leadership responsibilities. Traditional could be captain of your soccer team or president of the economics club at your high school. Or it could be something for non-traditional, like you are a caretaker and babysitter for younger siblings or an elderly relative, something like that. So although that's not through a formal organization through your high school, that is something that you're taking up a lot of time outside of the classroom. So maybe you have to go home right to school right away because you have to take care of your younger siblings, or you have family responsibilities that you need to take care of. All of those things are important to us and add a lot of context about why your application looks like the way it does. So you want to tell us about that. You want to quantify and measure your time as best as possible, as I said, and consider those non-traditional activities. So another thing could be commute time. So maybe you spend an hour and a half to going to school each way every day. So that really cuts into the time you have to get involved in extracurricular activities after school or before school. So let us know of those things, because then it may explain why your extracurricular activity area is not as robust as you think it should be. So as long as you tell us about all those factors, we will consider them in our application review. So some tips for this extracurricular section: write out the full descriptions. We don't make any, we as application readers cannot make any assumptions about you, and we have to go off what you explicitly write on the application. So you want to make sure you write out the full description so we have an accurate representation of your activities. So avoid acronyms and abbreviations. I would say if you want to talk about like California Scholarship Federation, so you'll, at least when you start off, write California Scholarship Federation, parentheses CSF, and then from then on you can just refer to it as CSF. So as long as you explain the acronym once, then you can continue to use it throughout the application. If you've received an award or activity or involved in an activity, you want to make sure that you give us the scope. So is it a school-wide activity? Is it statewide, national, or international? And you want to be very specific in the way you explain things. So for example, if you got a award that says like best student in Southern California, don't just put, I received this award in May 2022. The level of detail we're looking for is, I was nominated by a teacher to receive this award. All students in Riverside, San Diego, Imperial, and San Bernardino counties were eligible for this award. I had to go through an application process. I had to do an interview. I got the award, and it also came with a cash prize. It doesn't need to be all of those things, but that's just to give you an idea of what the detail we're looking for is, so we can get a better idea of the work that went into this specific activity. And then finally, again, estimate your time as best as possible. All right, so now we're going to talk about the personal insight questions. So this is where you get to tell us your story in your own words. The personal insight questions are about us getting to know you better through your life experiences, your specific interests, ambitions, and inspiration. So just getting to know you and what you're passionate about. Think of this as your interview with the admissions office. We get hundreds of there's over 100,000 applications every year, so we're unable to interview all those students. So we really utilize the personal insight questions as a way to get to know you, and you can use your own words to let us know about your own experiences. And while this section of the application is just one part of it all, it does provide a lot of context for the rest of your application. So maybe something in your personal insight questions can explain why your grades took a dip junior year, or why you shifted in terms of the honors classes you started to enroll in. All of those kinds of things to provide additional context of why your application looks like the way it does. There's some important things about the PIQs. They are not essays. So we're not looking for a thesis statement or body paragraphs or anything like that. We're just looking for context, and we're reading for content, not for style, not for grammar, nothing like that. So we're just trying to get to know you. As I said, it is your interview on paper, and it is never read alone. So the same person who's going to be reading your PIQ responses will also be the person looking at your GPA and your extracurricular activities and the additional comment section. So it's taken all together and read holistically at UC Berkeley specifically. Responses are not graded, so it's okay if you have the occasional typo, or maybe you missed an Oxford comma or something like that. So we're not looking at the grammar or anything like that. We're just trying to get the content, getting to know you. So just make sure that you're getting your point across clearly. And all responses will be used by all the campuses to which you apply. So you can't choose, like, I want Berkeley to read these 4, I want UCLA to read these other 4, and I want UC San Diego to read these ones. No, you submit it once, and all the UCs you apply to will receive the same personal insight question responses. So the basics, the freshman applicants will answer 4 out of 8 questions. So you'll have 8 prompts available to choose from, and you'll select 4. There's no preference on which ones you should answer. We're not secretly hoping that you'll pick 1, 3, 5, and 7, and 8. It's really up to you about what prompts fit your experiences and what you want us to know about you. It's 350 words per response, so it is, although it's much longer than the extracurricular section, it is not a lot of space for you to get your point across. You want to make sure you're very concise and just answer the question plainly as if I was asking it to you in an interview in person. So you don't have to create a setting or anything like that. You just get straight to the point and answer the question. Choose questions that tell us the most about you rather than what you think we want to hear about you. We're really looking for your authentic self in these responses. And the additional comment section, which will be covered later on, can be used to add additional context, but it is not a space for you to paste your 5th PIQ response that you really wanted us to see. It's utilized for something else. So don't consider it your 5th personal insight question prompt. So the PIQs can be knocked down to the following categories of just keywords. There's the talent and skill prompt, your favorite academic subject, leadership, challenge, helping your community, creativity, opportunity or barrier, and then finally, what makes you stand out. And the first prompt is major prep, which is required for all transfer applicants. So for the purposes of this application workshop, we're going to skip that one, but it is the transfer equivalent to the favorite academic subject prompt. So you can see here. So I will show it really quick just to show if you are considering the transfer route to the University of California, all students who are applying for transfer admission will have to answer this question. So just some food for thought. If you are considering the transfer pathway, you'll have this question. But moving on to the prompts for freshman admission. So the first prompt is the leadership prompt. Describe an example of your leadership experience in which you have positively influenced others, helped resolve disputes, or contributed to group efforts over time. So some things to consider here would be traditional versus non-traditional types of leadership. So when you're starting the process, start writing out all the things that are applicable to you in terms of leadership. So well, how am I a leader in my life? I'm the captain of the soccer team. I'm the shift leader at Starbucks. I'm the oldest sibling, so I have to watch my younger siblings after school. And then start thinking about how you have demonstrated leadership in each of these activities. And then once you go through that and see what you can write about, which one has the most, I'd say, meat to talk about, follow that and then start to free write. So for this prompt specifically, you want to consider accomplishments and what you learned from the experience, and be very specific in your responsibilities. So don't just talk about I am the best leader San Diego County has ever seen without actually providing examples of what you've done as a leader. And going back to the first bullet point, traditional versus non-traditional types of leadership, traditional could be something like captain of the soccer team or president of the economics club, or it could be the oldest sibling leadership example, or maybe you're your family's primary translator, or maybe you had to step up and get a part-time job to supplement your family's income. All of those things could be considered leadership as long as you tell us about it. Next is the creativity prompt. Every person has a creative side and it can be expressed in many ways. Problem solving, original and innovative thinking, and artistically, to name a few. Describe how you express your creative side. So know that there are different types of creativity. A lot of people, when they first hear this prompt, immediately think of a visual or performing art. So it can be that, but it's not limited to that. So if you want to talk about your poetry or painting or something like that, and that's how you express your creative side, that's totally fine. I will say though, if you're poetry or something like that is how you express your creativity, please don't answer the prompt in a poem. That is not what we're looking for. Just talk about it in plain language about how you express your creativity. But know that there are different types of creativity. One of the most impactful responses I've ever received for this specific prompt was from a transfer student in the Bay Area. And they talked about how they express their creativity, by just learning how to survive and navigate life as a full-time transfer student, a full-time Uber driver, while also experiencing homelessness. And they talked about how they have just learned to navigate life with its challenges, and they've just had to be creative in how they survive. So they know which IHOP has the nicest waitresses who will let him do his homework in the booths for an extended amount of time, and how to keep his car clean for Uber while also living out of it during his community college experience. So that's an example of I got a lot of context about the student's experience, and it may not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think of creativity. So some other things to consider would be, do you have a creative skill? Do you solve problems in different ways, out of the box kind of thinking? And does this skill affect you inside or outside of the classroom? Does it provide additional opportunities, for example? The next question is talent or skill. What would you say is your greatest talent or skill? How have you developed and demonstrated that talent over time? So you want to discuss why this specific talent or skill is meaningful to you. So maybe your skill is being bilingual, as I said earlier. Maybe you're the primary translator for your family, or it's opened up additional opportunities for you to get involved in internships or research opportunities or additional higher level coursework. Another impactful response I got to this question was from another student who talked about that their greatest talent that they're proud of is their ability to have small talk with anyone, that they're really good at like small chit chat, and they're really proud of that skill because they grew up with a very severe speech impediment, and they had to go to years of speech pathology or speech therapy classes to help them overcome this impediment. So the fact that they're able to just casually have a conversation with anyone now really speaks to the years of dedication and drive they had to put in to overcome that particular challenge. So that's another example of where I got a lot of context from about a student's experience from this prompt. So it's not necessary for you to have been recognized or received awards for this particular talent or skill, but if you have, definitely tell us about those. And let us know if these talents or skills have led to opportunities inside or outside of the classroom. And if it's a talent or skill, did it come naturally to you? Did you have to dedicate years of practice to achieve it? Let us know of all of those things when you're answering this prompt. All right, the next question is the challenge question. Describe the most significant challenge you have faced and the steps you have taken to overcome this challenge. How has this challenge affected your academic achievement? So for this one, I will say that there are only 2 instances where the University of California will have to reach out or report anything. And that's if you disclose something where you are currently being hurt or you are currently hurting someone else. Other than that, the UC application is completely confidential. So if you're an undocumented student, for example, and you want to talk about how being undocumented in the United States is the most significant challenge you have faced, because it not only affects you academically in terms of academic opportunities available, but it impacts your mental health, opportunities available to you outside of school, all those kinds of things. You don't have to talk about being undocumented, but I just want to let you know that it is confidential. So if you want to disclose that information, you will not be reported for that kind of information disclosed. So a personal challenge you can talk about, or a challenge you can talk about could be personal. It could be something you have faced in your community or school as a whole. So something could, a challenge that has been popular to talk about over the last few years has been COVID's individual impact on yourself and your family, because we all know COVID impacted everyone, but it affected everyone very differently. So maybe you suddenly had to become a full-time teacher to your younger siblings, or you suddenly had to share the Wi-Fi signal with 5 other people while they did distance learning school as well. Another thing you could talk about is maybe if you've experienced gun violence in your school or something like that, talk about how it has impacted your, not only did it affect you, but your whole community and school. So just some things to consider. How has it affected you academically and otherwise, if it has, and how have you overcome this challenge? Or maybe you're still navigating life with this challenge. So you can see it doesn't need to have been completed already. Like if you want to talk about the most significant challenge you have faced is being diagnosed with a learning difference. If you have dyslexia, it's not going to go away magically just because it's diagnosed, but maybe you've learned how to navigate life with dyslexia. So maybe talking about an independent educational plan or longer time to take exams or something like that. So just some examples of what you could talk about in this area. The next question is an opportunity or barrier question. Describe how you have taken advantage of significant educational opportunity or work to overcome an educational barrier you have faced. So because you only have 350 words, it's not enough time for you to adequately address both. So you want to pick either a barrier or an opportunity. An opportunity can be anything that has added value to your educational experience and better prepared you for college. So honors or academic enrichment programs, maybe you've been involved with educational talent search. Because you're here today, you can talk about Puente, you could talk about PoderOso, you could talk about any other things that have added value to your college experience or your high school experience and overall educational experience. If you chose to write about an educational barrier you faced, how did you overcome this barrier or strive to overcome them? So this could be something like a learning difference. It could also be something like commute time. For example, I'm the San Diego County representative for UC Berkeley admissions, and I see a lot of students in Southern San Diego County actually live in Mexico and cross the border every day to go to school. So some have talked about how much earlier they have to get up than their peers because they have to give themselves time in order to cross the border crossing and get to school on time by 8 a.m. and how much time it takes to go back to school or go back home after school. So just to provide additional context. And how another thing to consider would be how have you been able to overcome a barrier or a challenge that has come up in regards to your educational experience. All right, the next one is favorite academic subject. Describe your favorite academic subject and explain how it has influenced you. So this is, again, only available for freshman applicants. So you want to talk about how your interest in the subject developed. Did you take a class freshman year in social sciences that really blew your mind and now you're really interested in sociology and psychology and stuff like that? Maybe you went to the zoo when you were 10 and the elephant exhibit really stuck with you, and ever since then you've been obsessed with evolutionary ecology and stuff like that. So just to show that your favorite academic subject does not need to be a course that appears on your transcript. It could be something completely unrelated to anything you've learned formally in school, but just something that you've been doing outside of the classroom. So describe any experience you have inside or outside of the classroom, and talk about if this particular subject area has influenced your choice in major or career choice. And if you've been able to pursue any higher level coursework in this subject area. So that's whether that's an AP exam, maybe doing dual enrollment courses at your local community college, all of those kinds of things can be considered in that area. All right, the next question is helping your community. What have you done to make your school or community a better place? So this is where we get to see what you define as your community. Is your community Southern California? Is it the LGBTQIA community? Is it the undocumented community? All those kinds of things, we get to see what you consider your community. So you want to make sure you talk about your specific role in the community. And if you made your school or community a better place by fixing a problem, talk about what the problem was, what inspired you to act. Was it a group effort? Did you act alone and then eventually other people joined you? All of those kinds of things. And then another big important part of this is, what did you learn from your experience by giving back to your community? And then finally, what makes you stand out? Beyond what has already been shared in your application, what do you believe makes you stand out as a strong candidate for admissions to the University of California? So this is the last call of is there anything else that you would like to share with us that you haven't already disclosed on the application? So talk about what makes you unique. Don't be afraid to brag a little bit in this prompt, but also in any part of the application, because this is really where you're putting your best self forward and showing us why we need to admit you, why you would be an excellent asset to the University of California. So talk about what do you feel makes you belong on one of the UC campuses, and what have you not shared that you think will help us know you better throughout the process? So those are the personal insight prompts. If you have any questions or would like me to clarify, please let me know in the chat function. I'm just going to take a quick sip of water before moving on to the next section. All right, so now are some do's and don'ts for the PIQ section. So things to do, start early. It is October 26th. So you still have over a month to write these personal insight question responses. So the fact that you're here today or watching this recording later on, you're already in the right spot because you're getting more information and you're helping yourself through this process. So start early. You still have over a month left. Get feedback and revise to make sure that you're putting your best self forward and that your responses are very clear and you're getting your point across. You want to make sure you're concise because, again, you only have 350 words. So you want to make sure that each sentence is impactful and adding context. Identify what you learned out of what you got out of the experience that you're talking about and what you learned. So think bigger picture kind of a thing. So don't talk about, say you did organized a beach cleanup for your local beach, and that's how you helped your community. So I'd say 10% of the response should be about the details of what the event was, and 90% should be the impact it had on you and your community, just because we want to see bigger picture kind of a thing. Right, as if you're speaking to a stranger. Again, we cannot make any assumptions about you when we're reviewing your application, and we can only go off of what's on the application. Help the reader gain a visual image as best as you can, and you want to make sure to tell your story in your own words. So you want to make sure you are using a lot of I statements, I, me, my, to make sure the focus on each response is on you individually. You can talk about others, so maybe you're inspired by a leader in your community, but don't end up talking about the leader the whole time, and then at the very end say like, and they inspire me to do X, Y, Z, and then leaving that without a lot of information about you specifically. So some things to avoid in the personal insight questions. Don't use cliches. Don't use quotes. Those are other people's words taking up your word count. And don't use jokes either. So one, they may not translate well over text. And two, they may not age well. So what you think is funny in October 2022 may not be funny to me in February 2023 when I'm reading our application. Don't write about a particular campus if you've applied to multiple UC campuses. It's not going to negatively impact your chances of admission to Berkeley if you write about how much you've always wanted to go to UCLA, for example. It's just a missed opportunity because it's not really adding information about you specifically, and those words could be better utilized in a different way. So don't talk about a particular campus. Don't write about events in the distant past. So if you want to talk about maybe the most significant challenge you have faced is coming to the United States in 4th grade and being an ESL student. That's fine to talk about as long as you bring it back to your current self. So you can touch on things in the current past or in the distant past, but you have to make sure that you are bringing it back to who you are today, the senior in high school who's applying to the University of California. So the personal insight questions are not a place for you to just think like, okay, I need to say the saddest thing that has ever happened to me, and it's for sure going to get me in. It doesn't work like that. So you want to make sure that everything is relevant to who you are today. So maybe your experiences as a 4th grader coming to the United States for the first time has influenced your overall academic career and why you are pursuing a certain major or have taken the classes you've taken, all those kinds of things. So just make sure it's connected to who you are right now. Don't be ashamed to brag, as I said earlier, and don't write about everyone but yourself. So again, utilize those I, me, my statements and stuff like that. Don't duplicate information in other parts of the application. So if you think you adequately address something in the extracurricular section, you don't need to keep talking about it in the personal insight questions or the additional comments. As I said, the same person who's going to be reading your PIQ responses will be reading every other part of the application. So as long as it's on there once, we will consider it. Don't assume we know everything about you, and don't treat this like an English essay, as I've said. So next, we're going to talk about the writing process. So how you can get started on this endeavor. So as I said earlier, they can be broken down into a few words. The prompts, so you can see talent or skill, significant challenge, leadership, helping our community. So after reading the prompts, pick the 4 you think would best align with your experiences and just like write that in a Google Doc, leadership. And then right underneath that, list your experiences and just think, how have I been a leader in my life? And just start thinking like, well, I've been the president of the student body, president of my honor society, captain of my soccer team, I'm a caretaker for siblings and grandparents, and I'm also the manager at a local restaurant. And just think about like, okay, how can I brainstorm? How can I talk about like expand on all of these experiences? So for example, shift manager at Starbucks. So who are you? You're the shift manager at Starbucks. When are you doing this? During your shift, when you work about 15 hours a week. How did you do this? You applied for it and you were promoted because of your leadership skills and your ability to manage people under stressful situations. What do you have to do? Where is it that you're doing this activity? Why are you doing this? Is it because you want your own income so that you can start investing in your Roth IRA or get involved in the stock market? Maybe it's because you are financially dependent from your family and you have to take care of yourselves. Maybe it's because you had a parent lose income due to COVID or something like that, and now you had to step up and earn income to help pay rent or something like that. All those kinds of things can come up in the brainstorming process. And then just start to write freely about these activities. Don't limit yourselves to 350 words in your first draft. Just get it all out on the page and then begin the process of shortening responses after it's all done. So it's much easier, and it's much easier to be creative when you just put it out on the page and then start to edit later on. So then just start cutting sentences about if they are a nice sentence, but maybe it doesn't add a lot of context, you would cut that out and see what adds value. You want to revise multiple times and solicit feedback, but I will say don't solicit feedback to the point where your own voice has been erased because you've just taken everyone else's edits and then you read it and you think, well, this doesn't sound like me. This isn't my voice anymore. So you want to make sure that you get feedback, but still stay true to yourself and your own experiences. And a good piece of advice as well is to read it out loud to see how it would sound. If I were to ask you the question in a coffee shop, for example, how would you respond? Would what you've written sound like a normal, clear response to the question? And then don't forget the additional comment section. So the additional comment section are optional, but it is up to you to utilize them. I'd say there's space available, put something in there just to provide additional context. It can be written in any format, so paragraphs or bullet points. And again, this is not your place to use it for an additional personal insight question response. And this is just adding additional context, as I keep saying. So this section can be used to explain a bad grade, semester, or grade trend. So maybe you lost a family member at the beginning of freshman year, so that's why your freshman year grades, or you started off high school not doing so well, but that you've had an upward grade trend ever since then. Or maybe you had 3 Spanish teachers your sophomore year, so that's why you didn't do so well in Spanish, because you weren't getting a lot of consistent information from the same person during the year, and that's why your grades suffered during that time. You can explain additional background information not in another part of the application. Expand on the extracurricular section. If there wasn't enough room in that section, you can expand into the additional comment section. And then tell the reader any information that would provide additional context. One thing I see every year in applications in the additional comment section, which is a nice sentiment, but ultimately doesn't add value to your application, is people thanking the application readers for reading the application. Just like, thank you so much for taking the time to read this application. I really appreciate it. It is a nice sentiment, but I would much rather have you use those word counts to talk about another part of your academic experience or context, rather than thanking me. I will say in advance, you're welcome. We should be thanking you for applying to the university. So I would say, tell us more information if you can. All right, so there are some resources available to you online. Honestly, instead of copying down this URL, just Google UC PIQ freshman, and it'll take you to the site. And I will open it up for questions at this point. And if we don't have any questions, I think we still have quite a bit of time. I will share some examples of some additional comment sections, as well as some personal insight questions responses. And we can go over whether it's value added or if it's neutral value. Yeah, thank you.
Alberto, we did have a question about the required question
sure.
for transfers. I dropped it in the chat with the help from Dean, but someone wanted us to go over some tips for that question.
Oh, sure. So as I said, so the prompt is describe how you have prepared for your intended major, including your readiness to succeed in your upper division courses once you're enrolled at university. So again, this is required for every transfer student applying to any UC campus. So you want to talk about how your interest in the major developed. What have you done inside or outside of the classroom in relation to this major? It's not a place for you to talk about like I've prepared for my mechanical engineering major by taking math 1A, math 1B, physics 7A, physics 7B, physics 7C, because we're already going to have that part of the application or information in another part of the application. So this is where we see, where did your passion for the major developed? Have you done any internships or research opportunities related to this major? What sparked your interest in this subject? All those kinds of things. So just asking us, why did you decide on economics or psychology or ethnic studies or something like that? So that's where we get this information. I will say it can be tricky if you are applying to multiple UC campuses with different majors. So say you're applying to Davis as animal science, Berkeley as ethnic studies, and UC Santa Barbara as communication. Then it can be kind of tricky. So in that case, talk about how your major or you're interested in a lot of different things and you hope to utilize your time at the University of California to set you up for success in your ultimate career goal of blank or something like that. Or there has to be something in common as to why you're applying to all those different majors. So just try to find a common thread and talk about it that way. I hope that provides a little more information. Let's see. And then we got another question for the leadership PIQ. Can you place more than one leadership experience or would you recommend one? So I'd say probably maximum of 2 kind of a thing, just because we want to get in depth about how you are a leader in specific cases. So I would say maximum of 2 examples of your leadership, and just talk about like the common threads about maybe you did your first leadership experience was X, and then you learned a lot from it, so you were able to become an even better leader when you did activity Y or something like that, and build off of that, if that makes sense. But I would say avoid listing multiple if you're just saying like I've been a leader in the following ways. I've done this, without providing specific details about each one. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. Feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. I'm going to do a quick screen change. All right, and let me share my screen here. All right. So now you can see additional comments. There's 2 places for additional comments on the application. There's one for just general additional comments, and then there's one for academic history specifically. So you can see here, this student talked about significant turnover and instability during their 4 years in high school. They've had 4 principals in the 4 years, more than a dozen assistant principals, and many of the AP teachers I've had either left or were new to their curriculum. And they had a very high turnover rate of 20 to 30% each year. So they talked about limited opportunities for current enrollment and saying that they would have liked to take in more comprehensive courses in science, for example, but because of the curriculum their school adopted, that was not possible. And that's why they weren't able to take chemistry or physics, which are 2 courses that are vital for them in the field that they're interested in. And then they provided their COVID instructional schedule for 2020 to 2021. So this level of detail, it's not saying that this is what exactly it has to look like, but this is just a great example of a student utilizing the additional comment section to talk about what their academic history has been during high school. And then the next prompt is the general additional comment section. So this is what will appear after the PIQs. So this person talks about they were selected to go on a trip to Nicaragua with Build On Trek. To get selected, they had to meet community service hours, have a certain GPA, and they also had to attend mandatory weekly meetings. They talk about how transformative the experience was and how it was an opportunity for growth. So this is a great example. If they weren't able to maybe they ran out of space in their extracurricular sections, or they had other things to talk about in the PIQ sections, but they're like, I really want you to know about my trip to Nicaragua I did after junior year. So they can utilize this section for that. All right. So now we'll talk about some examples of personal insight question responses. So this is question 4, the prompt. So you can see, I'll let you all read this and see this was the educational opportunity question. So I'll take a few minutes to read that and then we will discuss it. I was muted. One thing about the personal insight questions, there's nothing on the application that will be negative or bring down your chances of admission. It's either going to add value or neutral value. So we're just trying to build you up. We're never going to say like, oh, we didn't like that, we're going to bring you back down. So it's either you're going to stay where you were or it's going to add value. So for this response, we consider this a value added response. The experience was timely, it's current. They explain the job responsibilities, the challenges, and how each challenge was handled. They articulates the skills used and learned from this specific experience, and it describes the impact of it and what they learned, even without being able to finish the job overall. So we got a lot of context from this individual response. So we would consider this value added. So now moving on to the second question, or the second case study, which is answering the creativity prompt. And it will give us another 2 minutes to review this one. All right, so for this response, after reading it, come in your mind, think, is this value added or would this be neutral value? So for this one, the answer is it's a missed opportunity. It would be neutral value. So the student thoroughly describes the comments and the characters, but but doesn't give enough tangible contextual information. So consider these questions when answering the question, like when reading this response. Did the student take lessons to develop this creative talent? Did the student try to publish a comic online or anywhere else? So it's helpful to see, like, is my response answering more questions, or is it prompting you to have more questions after reading it? So that would be considered a missed opportunity for, like, oh, I actually had more questions than when I first started. So we want to provide a lot of contextual information. So some examples of what to consider when you are writing your responses. So with that, I will open up to my colleagues for any last pieces of information or advice, or if any last minute questions.
I would say real quickly, for the counselors and students, don't be afraid to use the additional comments section. That's a section that really gets underutilized at times, and it's free space to really add a lot of context to the student's application itself, and highly recommend to fill out additional comments and not to miss out on that opportunity to give fill in the gaps for your application.
Totally. That's a great piece of advice. Another question that just came in was how important are hooks? So it's not important. You already have our attention because you've submitted an application. So if you are trying to think of, like, what's the catchiest way for me to start this prompt, just if I were to read the question out loud to you, how would you start to answer that question? That's what we're looking for. We're not looking for you to create a scene of a dark and stormy night. And that's when I realized I had to, like, oh, that's how my passion about elephants developed. And that's why I'm so interested in zoology or something like that. You don't need to do that. Just answer the question very plainly, as if I were asking it to you. And then we just have one last thing we want to say before we end today's session. Just another push for the personal insight question, individual chat appointments that we have available later this next month, and also the just overall application workshop help. Also on those days, so you have two options. You can either do application help or the personal insight questions review with an individual staff member. And thank you, Dean, for just putting that in the chat right there. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you got some information that clarifies the process for you. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to myself or any one of the PoderOso team members, and we'd be happy to help. All right.
There's a question about what are some cliches you should stay away from?
Okay. Cliches you should stay away from. So I would say some cliches to stay away from would be just like something that doesn't really talk about them specifically. So just talk about, like, just speaking in platitudes that are just general sayings that I'm not really getting enough information about the individual applicant. So I would say that kind of information. And I see we have some other questions coming in. Because I do have to end this chat, I would say please email these to myself directly or to any one of the PoderOso team members, and we will happy to answer any questions you have. So thanks again. Best of luck on the application process, and go Bears.